free to record.
Okay. Let me start up my screen recorder real quick. Sean reminded me. Okay. Okay, so I'm Taylor Otwell. I wrote the Laravel framework a couple of years ago, and as we talked about yesterday, we use a lot of Symfony components now. So the main things I really find myself working on with Laravel are like Eloquent and the schema builder, the migrations, the Blade templating engine, kind of the stuff that makes Laravel unique is where I spend a lot of my time, and a lot of like the routing and HTTP stuff I leave to Symfony. So they handle a lot of kind of the plumbing code, and I do a few other things. So it's kind of crazy, you know, to release Laravel 2 years ago and like not know if anyone was ever going to use it but me, and I was kind of fine with that because I was using it for side projects I was working on. And now it's crazy to be here in Amsterdam with like a couple hundred people using it to do really cool stuff. So thanks for being a part of the community and for using Laravel, and it's been a really fun ride to work on stuff together. So today I have a really practical talk. Like at the last Laracon, I gave kind of these meta talks, which are really hard to prepare about like the state of Laravel and stuff. So today I'm just going to talk about building Artisan commands. It's like really bread and butter, practical talk. So how many people have written Artisan commands? Probably you've used Artisan. Have you actually written your own? Okay, so quite a few. So you might, at the start, there might be some stuff you already know, but we'll kind of work up to a few more advanced things. So if you're totally new to Laravel, Artisan is like the name for the command line. So it's like the console for Laravel. I can show it to you. So if you're just in a Laravel project, if you just type PHP Artisan list, you'll get a list of all of the console commands. This is based on Symfony console, so which is really cool because we kind of get like some nice automatic stuff like this list, and like we get help screens for every command. So you can see we have quite a few commands. We have queue commands, session commands, migrations, seeding, controller generators, cache stuff, a ton of stuff. Tinker command is kind of cool. Have y'all seen Tinker? Yeah, if you haven't seen that, what this does is like if you fire it up, you get like this, I don't know what, like a REPL or RE, like some kind of like interactive programming environment. So you can like pull a user from the database right here and like put it in a variable. Let me get on my VM, sorry.
I was asking about this just the other day and someone pointed me to a package like that.
Oh yeah? Yeah, so if I pull a user down, I just like have it in that variable, and I can just like dump out user to array. You know, so you can like work with your app like right there on the command line. It's kind of cool. That's not really well advertised, I don't think. But you can even like update the user. Like the current email is my email address, so I can just change it to like foo@bar.com, do user save. And if I look at that in the database, so it reloads here. Wow, that's really slow. But it'll update in the database, and you can just kind of tinker with your app. It's kind of cool. You can do all kinds of stuff. So that's what Artisan is, and I'm going to walk you through kind of building a basic command real quick, and we'll kind of work our way up to like injecting dependencies in commands and kind of reusing them. Okay, so basic command. To make one, you would just go on your command line again. You can type PHP Artisan. First, I'll show you the help screen. It's called command make. There's a couple options here. You can see we have one argument, which is right here. It's kind of hard to see. It's highlighted, name. So all you have to do is pass what you want the class name of your command to be, and it will generate a file for you with like the basic structure of your new command line command. Okay, so we're going to say PHP Artisan command make. We'll just call it foo command for now. And you can see command created successfully. So where that's going to be is in your app folder, commands. You will see our foo command. Let me make this a little bigger for you. Okay, does that look good? Okay, so it has a couple properties. In Symfony console, they have like this fluent interface for configuring the command name, which is like what you use to call the command in the description. But in Laravel, we kind of like abstract that a little bit and just give you two properties, so you don't have to like fool around with calling this fluent method and stuff. So you can put whatever you want here, foo or whatever, and then you just describe it, which is going to show up like on your help screen. And then you'll have a constructor, which will just be empty. And then you'll have your fire, which this is what is called, like when that command is run from the console, this is what is going to get called. Okay, and from here you have access to like this input from Symfony and this output, which is the output interface. So all that stuff is available to you right there. And then you can list your arguments here in this get arguments method. You just return an array of arguments. They can be required or optional, which I'll show you in the next command. And then you have get options, which are like your dash dash foo equals bar, like your switch things. Those are your options. And your arguments are like what I passed to the command, the foo command, that was an argument, not an option. Does that make sense? Sweet, okay. No response. Okay, so let me just start with this intro command, which I've already got coded up a little bit, and I've got some comments. Okay, so the command name is intro, so to run it, we would just say php artisan intro. And then in the fire command, what we're going to do is we're going to pull in the argument, which is going to be the name. We're going to pull in an option, which is the conference. And then we're just going to dump out some info. Like in Symfony, you have to do like something like this output right line, and then you like wrap it in these funky info tags. But we kind of like wrap that up in this info, which it wraps it for you in the info tag. So it's just a little faster. And we're just going to say, hello, whatever your name is, welcome to the Artisan CLI. And if we get a conference that's going to be an optional argument, we're going to say, also, you're attending the whatever conference, okay? So down here in our arguments, we have name listed, which will be the name of the person we're going to pass in. It's marked as input argument required. And then we have the conference, which is also required. So that's under options. Okay, so to run this, we just come to our console. We can say php artisan intro. Oh, I forgot to give a name. It's required. My name's Taylor, and the conference is going to be our option, Laracon. And you can see it dumped out. It pulled the name argument and the option off the command line. So it's super easy to parsing these switches and stuff is really easy for your application. You don't have to worry about it. You can just say this option, pull it in. It's going to parse that command string for you, so you don't even have to think about that. Okay, is that pretty cool? Yeah. Pretty basic, but one cool thing with options I want to show you real quick is you can actually do right here a value none. And what that does, when I pull this conference, I'll just dump it out for you. This DD function, which is like the most popular function on Laravel, I swear. What this does, if you haven't seen it before, is it's basically a shortcut for dive, var dump. People I took that out and people went nuts. Like, I had like 3 pull requests in like 10 minutes to put that back in. Okay, so I'm just going to dump it out for you so you can see what it is. But remember, I changed this to value none. So I'll show you what this does. What it allows you to do is to say like php artisan intro Taylor, and then just have like a blank switch, and it just will give you like a Boolean, like true. So it lets you build kind of Boolean switches that don't have values or anything. So you can use it for like php artisan foo, and like say you have like a force switch to like force it to override some warning or something. So that's what those are used for. Okay, so that's value none. Let me change this back to value required. Okay, so that's just a basic command and how to get arguments and options from the command line. You'll notice that I had 2 different colors when I ran that green and orange. What that is we also have this comment, which is it's just a different way to highlight stuff. You know, it's nothing magical, but just lets you do some different colors to kind of build some distinction in your console app. There's also this error, which will be like red if you want to show an error. And there's also questions and stuff, which I'll show you in the next branch. Okay, so that's a basic command. I'm going to go to another branch right now. This is how I've kind of got it structured, but let me stash any changes I did there. Okay, so let me skip to input. Okay, let me close that guy. All right, now the input command, this is going to actually be interactive with the developer. So what we can do is we can actually ask you questions. We can ask you for like a password and have it be like a secret type question that we don't want to actually show on the console. So how that works is super simple. It's like super intuitive. All you do is say this ask. So we can say ask what is your name, and it's going to actually prompt them for the name, and it's going to capture that into whatever variable we want. Then we can come down. We can ask them a secret question like please tell us your password. We won't tell anyone, we swear. And we're going to keep that in a variable, and then we're going to say, just kidding, here's your password. Okay, so this is basic, just kind of developer input with Artisan. So again, in Symfony, I can't remember exactly what it is, but it's like this, get, helper set, dialog, ask. I don't know. It's something really verbose and silly. But anyway, it's this ask and this secret in Laravel. OK, so if I run this command, let me just list it so we can see. This PHP Artisan list should show it. Yeah, there's input. I didn't give it a description, but PHP Artisan input, we run that guy. It prompts us. It's got this kind of distinct color. And we say, my name is Taylor. Tell me my password. And you can see like whatever I put here is not showing. But I actually did type in characters. So it captured it to that variable without kind of showing us what we were doing. OK, so input lets you, it's really quick and easy to like build these interactive console applications. And you can do some really cool stuff like with this. Like people have written deployments tools with Artisan and all kinds of stuff. So that is input. Any questions on that? That's pretty much all there is to it. Is yeah, you can like define your own colors. That's kind of built into Symfony console. I don't have any helpers for that, but yeah, you can do whatever colors you want, like define. I forget how they're defined, but yeah, you can customize it in any way you want. They have other helpers too that are really cool. Like if you go to PHP Artisan routes, you see you get this table that lists like all your routes, kind of like Rails routes. And that table building is like a Symfony helper. You just give it like an array of headers and like an array of values, and it like manages the widths because that's kind of funky to do yourself. So that's really handy. There's a lot of Symfony helpers. If you go out to their docs, you can do all kinds of cool stuff. OK, any more questions on input or any kind of basics?
Just one general question. Is it such a generated command? Is it available instantly, or do you have to do something to the override or something?
When I make the command, yes, let me show you that. He asked if it was available instantly after I make the command, or did I have to like register with the autoloader? Is that what you said? OK, so when I make the command, I don't have to register with the autoloader. That will be handled by default. But what you do have to do is in your start folder, you will see a Artisan file. And what this does is every time you run an Artisan command, this file will be loaded. It's like a bootstrap file for the console. And all you really have to do here is say Artisan add and then pass in like new whatever command. Can you see that? That's all you have to do. That will make it show up. The auto-loading you don't have to worry about. No, it doesn't do it for you. That'd be cool, though. The reason it doesn't do it for you is because you could be passing stuff like in the constructor. You know, so I wouldn't really have a great way to pass that in for you, but I'll show you something like related to the IOC later. That's kind of cool. OK? Anything else on kind of the intro stuff? OK, I think we're going to get into some more stuff that be a little more interesting now. You can see in my branches, I kind of like wanted to come back and show a badge, so I made a 1.5 branch here. OK, this is an example of a bad command, or it's not. It depends on what you're doing, but it's not that great. Most speakers, I was telling Ian, most speakers are like, don't take what I say as gospel. But I'm waiting for a speaker to come up and be like, this is the right way, like be like super confident. But anyway, this is a bad command. And the reason this command is bad is, take a look at this. Has everyone seen like the Leroy Jenkins YouTube? You know, the World of Warcraft thing? Anyway, in this command, this guy just like goes Leroy Jenkins on it, and like his command fires off, and he's like in like 4 loops, and he's like doing all kinds of funky closure, mapping, array stuff, and he just goes like all in on this command. Now, and then he's like done. What was it? At least I have chicken or something? OK, so if you're not familiar with the Leroy Jenkins thing, it's this WoW guy who like, they're like preparing to like fight some big boss or something, I guess. And like, they're all like really preparing, like it's really tedious. And he comes back to his computer and just like screams his name out, Leroy Jenkins, just like rushes in, everybody dies. And it's pretty funny. You should YouTube it. OK, so now the reason this is bad, can be bad for your app, is you can't reuse this. You can reuse it, but it's just, you've got all this logic kind of trapped up in this console command, and you can't like call it from anywhere else. You know, like what if you want to call some of this logic from a controller? What if you want to call it from an API you've built? It's kind of locked up into this bad command. And it's doing all kinds of funky stuff. And sure, we can come in here and we can call PHP Artisan bad, and at least I have chicken, but I can't really reuse this from anywhere else in my app. Better solution would be to inject stuff into the console command. Let me switch to that branch. I changed that chicken thing. Okay. Here's a better way you can do it. We can actually inject stuff into the console commands using our IOC container. Now, before I get into this, I'm going to give a quick demo on the IOC container if you're not familiar with it in Laravel. Most basic way to think about an IOC container is kind of like Fabian's pimple container, where it's like just this container of closures that resolve stuff, and they can resolve anything: arrays, objects, strings, anything. In Laravel, the application just serves as an IOC container, and we can just call app bind. We give you a key, and you give it a function, and whenever you say app make foo, it will just give you back whatever. So like right here, I'm binding foo into the container, saying return an array of foo bar, and then I have a route that responds to get verbs and just returns whatever app make foo gives. So if I hit this route in my browser, I should just see that array. Yeah, the array foo bar. Okay, so that's the absolute simplest way to use a container, is just kind of this like closure store. But that honestly gets pretty tedious to configure, which we'll see later. You can also do a few other different things. This is a different way to register it. A lot of people have been talking about facades with Laravel, but you can also use Laravel almost just like Silex. You can just say like app router get. You don't have to go through like the static interface, which a lot of people don't know about, but I'm just showing you like an alternative syntax here. So if we say app singleton, what that means is I want you to call this closure when I ask for the when I ask you to resolve it, and then on any subsequent requests for that object, just use the same object you got the first time. So basically, like, you only want to new up one instance of this object per request. So it's just going to manage that for you. And a quick way to test that is I'm going to generate a random string. So since this is registered as kind of like a singleton type thing, we should see the same string every time we resolve this out of the container. So if I hit that bar, I should see an array with the two identical strings, which I do because it's registered as a singleton. Now, if I change that to say just a regular bind and I hit this, you see we got two different strings because it hit that closure twice instead of just once. Does that make sense? Okay, so that is singletons. Now, here's the cool thing about the Laravel IOC container, and this is, I think this was pretty new at the time it came out. I hadn't seen it before in PHP. So what you can do is you can actually resolve stuff that you haven't bound. And how it works is it uses reflection. So when I say right here on line 64, app make conference, I'm not giving it like a key string, I'm giving it a class name. And so what happens is it says, okay, conference class, I'm going to reflect into that constructor and read this type hint right here, this location. And I say, okay, conference needs a location passed in. Let me new up one of those. And if that needs any dependencies, it will inject those. It's like recursive down the object graph. Okay, so I didn't have to bind anything. I didn't have to configure anything. But when I hit this auto route, we're actually going to get a valid conference instance. No, I'm not. Let me make a property. Yeah. Okay, valid conference instance. That's like the slickest, most powerful feature in the Laravel IOC container because you're just resolving stuff without any configuration.
Location is nowhere. Can you be a location object?
There you go. So it's recursive. Thanks. It's recursive down the object graph, and it will just keep passing stuff in. Okay, now the only time you do have to configure something with this is like when Jeffrey was talking, he mentioned that app bind where he said when you need this interface, use this implementation. You do have to configure that because we have to know what implementation to use. There's no way for us to guess that. But if it's just a concrete type, it doesn't have an interface or anything, it will just figure this out all day long, which is really sweet. It saves you a lot of code. So you don't have to make closures for every single object you need to put in the container. Okay, does that make sense? Any questions there? If you ever get time, just like read through the container class. It's just like one file, illuminate container, and you can see how that works. That's pretty slick code. Okay, so Now that we've had a quick demo of the IOC container, let's jump back into this command. Remember, we had all our logic like Leroy Jenkins style in the command, and we wanted to like refactor that so it'd be more reusable. So now we're going to start injecting this plutonic reverser, which it's from Ghostbusters apparently. I've never even seen Ghostbusters. I don't know if that gets me kicked out of like a nerd conference, but yeah, apparently plutonic reversal is like really bad. You don't want to do it, but okay, so we're going to inject this class. Now, how do we tell Laravel that we need to inject this? Okay, we don't really have to. In the start artisan file, which we registered our command in earlier when we talked about his question, instead of artisan add, I can just say artisan resolve and give it a class name. And this says when you need this console command, use the IOC container to make this. Like, I'm not going to pass in my own instance. I just want you to make it from the container. And so that's really handy because you can leverage the full power of Laravel dependency injection in your artisan commands, which is really nice, and it's super easy to add. Okay, so now, since we have this class, this plutonic reverser defined in our, I just put it in the routes file. You can put it in its own file, but I just did this for speed. So when our inject command runs, the plutonic reverser will get injected, and in our fire, we're just going to call reverser reverse. We'll just var dump it so we can see that we actually did get that instance, and then report back to the captain or whatever. Okay, so let's run that PHP artisan inject. Okay, it worked. Sweet. So we var dumped. We actually did get an instance of plutonic reverser. We called the reverse method. It did its thing. It did whatever it does to reverse plutonics. And then we got an info message put back. So what this gave us is now if we need to call plutonic reverser from like an API call or like a controller, we can just use that plutonic reverser class in our controller and not have to do like artisan call and like call off like programmatically to the command line, which is it's like kind of a slow process. So you kind of get some more reusability out of your app domain code. And the reason you want to do that is like, you know how in my book, if you've read my book, I talk about how controllers and HTTP are kind of like the transport layer to your real application. So like your application is like this black box that has like, you get stuff out of the database and it has business logic and stuff, and the controller is just like a transport mechanism for HTTP to like call into your app. So when the controller method gets called, it's calling into like some kind of like domain models or repositories or whatever that do your business logic and then sends back HTTP stuff. Console is kind of the same way. Like think of them as just like, it's just the controller equivalent for your command line. They're just kind of like, just like controllers almost in the sense that you treat them like you inject your domain logic, your business logic into them. They're just a transport layer for your command line. So very similar to controllers in that way. It's a good way to think about them. Okay, so that is basic dependency injection on the console. Any questions on that?
I'm just curious why IOC isn't included by default with Artisan as opposed to the rest of the framework.
Why is it IOC stuff not by default?
Yeah, because it looks like you need to do the resolve manually rather than the IOC taking care of it when it sees the dependency in the constructor.
Yeah, it's because, like, let me think. You mean why isn't like Artisan? I'm not sure I'm totally getting the question, but.
I'm just wondering why we need to do that there, whereas before when you're showing us through the controller action, it was doing it automatically when it instantiates the controller.
Yeah.
Why not for Artisan tasks as well?
I don't know. I'm kind of on the spot.
I can answer that probably.
Why?
Through the routing, you get a string, and you can put a string into the reflection system. So then you can do all kinds of logic before it actually constructs. And if you have just a new inject command, the constructor is already fired. So there's no way to go into that process.
Yeah, I think another thing you're getting at is he's asking why do I even have to do this at all? Why do I have to register them at all? That's mainly because with Symfony, I have to register every command beforehand. I can't lazy load commands like that with Symfony console. I think that's the real issue. Okay, so any other questions on kind of dependency injecting into commands? And this works on, like you said, this works on controllers too. Like you can just type stuff in your controller constructor. It will automatically be resolved through the IOC container by default. That was like one of the things I brought over from .NET that was really handy. Okay, so easy dependency injection. Laravel is like big on dependency injection by default, kind of. So makes testing a lot easier. Okay, let's see what else I have here. All right, Q. Gosh, keep changing stuff. All right. I think we're mainly in the routes file this time. So, like I said, this really makes your business logic reusable, and we're going to kind of demo that with the queue. So what we're going to do, has everyone used the Laravel queue? Who's used it? Gosh, quite a few people, okay. But, okay. Yeah, this would be good. You'll like this. Okay, so we're going to build a Plutonic reversal handler. I should have picked a better name because that's really like a mouthful to say. Okay, so basically what this is going to do is we're also going to inject our Plutonic reverser into that guy, and we're just going to receive the job and the data. Laravel has a unified queue API, which I'll show you in a second. It passes you a job and then just an array of data. We're going to call our Plutonic reverser and then just delete the job. So that is all we're going to do. And with Laravel, the syntax is queue push. We just push a class out onto the queue basically. And by default, it's going to call the fire method, but you can also do something like whatever method you want with the @ sign, kind of like registering controllers. And that will push it onto like a background queue like Beanstalk or Amazon SQS or IronMQ, and you can run stuff in the background. It's really handy for like sending emails. We do that a lot with Snappy. So all our emails are queued off in the background because it's kind of like, it takes a second, you know, but it's enough of a delay to kind of like hurt the user experience. Okay, so now when I queue push this Plutonic reverser, it is going to resolve all that out of the IOC container. By default, again, you don't have to say like I want this out of the IOC container, and then it's going to call it, and then we'll just clear out the job. Okay, this is going to use the sync queue at first. So all we should see is when we run this, we should see this reversing Plutonics when it gets called. Okay, so if we call PHP Artisan, actually I hit a route, I'm sorry. We just hit the default route. And it pushed that out onto the queue, ran, reverse Plutonics, whatever. Okay, so now we can use our class in our console, and we can easily use it on our queue. So we've already gained like a lot of reusability with our business logic. So that's kind of the benefit of why we don't want to be Leroy Jenkins in our console commands. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so now I'm going to show like more of a full real queue demo. What branch is that? 4. Okay. Now this is more of a serious queue demo, and for this I'm going to be using Beanstalk, and I've got a console set up. It's called Beanstalk Console, but I call it Beansole. It's kind of cool. Okay, so I can just add a server here. It's just going to be localhost. Okay, and this is really nice. This is on GitHub. You can just Google like Beanstalk Console. It's like this nice web interface for seeing what jobs are in the queue. I just look at localhost. Currently, right here on this second column, current jobs ready, there's 0 jobs. So we're going to throw like quite a few out there, and we'll see how that gets processed. Okay, so right here in this route, I'm just going to do a quick for loop, and let's go ahead and make this like 15 to give us a few extra. I'm going to queue push send email. Up here I have a send email class. It's just going to log whatever data we pass. It's going to sleep for 1 second to kind of simulate sending an email, and then we're just going to kick the job off the queue. Okay, so first I will hit this route. Now you can imagine sending 15 emails. I mean, how long would that take? That would take a good like 20 or 30 seconds, you know, like if you're in the web request and you want to send 15 emails. But with the queue, you can see how fast that came back. Like, it comes back really fast to queue up 15 jobs. Like, it's almost instant to throw that out on Beanstalk. Okay, so now if we come out on Beanstalk console, I don't have anything like actually working the queue. Like, they're just sitting out there on Beanstalk. So if I refresh the screen, you can see that second column now has 30 jobs ready. And so what I do to work that is I can do 2 things. I can come into my console and type PHP Artisan queue. Let's see, let me get on my VM just in case. I can type PHP Artisan queue work. That will just work the first job on the queue. And if I refresh that, you see there's 29 jobs left. So it works that first job, and then it's not working anymore. The better way, or the way you would do it in production, would be to run PHP Artisan queue listen. Sorry. Someone caught that fast, or like typo, like as soon as I got it, like watching. PHP Artisan queue listen. And now it's just going to keep running. See, it's at 28. If I refresh it, it's at 27. So it's like processing those jobs like about a second at a time since I'm sleeping for a second. So this is really slick. And the way you would set this up into production is like set it up with supervisor so that it's kind of always running. And if your queue listener goes down, it will fire back up. If you don't know how to set that up, Google it, because there's quite a few tutorials since it's been around a while. But I like totally suck at configuring servers, and I was able to do it. So you'll be able to figure it out. It's pretty simple. Okay, but that will just keep it running and kind of always be there. Another option, if you don't want to configure any servers, is to use IronMQ push queues, which when you push something out onto the queue will just call like a URL in your application with the data, and you can process it that way, and you don't have to run any listeners on your own, which is kind of handy. Okay, so all those jobs were processed, and you can see we passed foobar into our data. So if I check my logs, I should see that stuff out there. Yeah, you can see all those arrays are getting logged. You can see they're like a couple seconds apart from the queue jobs as they're working. So that is a basic queue kind of pushing and working. Does that make sense? Any questions on the queue stuff? The queue stuff is like, that's pretty baller. Like, as we say in America, like that was pretty new when it first came out, and like totally just revolutionized the way you can build apps in PHP, because there was no like unified interface like this for queues before this in PHP. Like there was driver based and supported multiple drivers, and if you're not using Laravel, you can pull an Illuminate queue component, and you can get access to all this as long as you're kind of using Symfony console, and you can use all this stuff, but it's super handy. Another cool feature, like you can even say queue push and give it a closure. And like you don't even have to have a class. You can just queue stuff up like that, and it will still run on the queue. So like if I run up 15 of those jobs, see, is this cleared out? Yeah, those are cleared out. So let me queue up those. You can see I put 14 out there. What am I doing? Oh, I forgot to delete them. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, but you can queue up closures like for quick stuff. If you just want to like pull in some model and do something with it real quick on the queue, and you don't want to make like a whole class for it, just throw a closure out on the queue. It like serializes the code out and encrypts it and stuff. It's kind of funky, but it's pretty sweet. Makes sense? Any questions on that? Yeah. Dale just mentioned we also have two functions. Like I mentioned, email is a common use case, so you can actually just say mail queue here, and you give it like a view name, some data, and it will pass you a message where you can just set like whoever it's to, whatever. You can do cool stuff like that, and it's kind of just an easy wrapper for queuing a mail message, and then it will get read off. And you can even say like mail later, like say someone signs up to your app, and like 10 minutes later you want to say, hey, welcome to our app. Here's some cool stuff, like kind of like a little tutorial. Just say mail later, 10 minutes, done. It's really simple. Pretty sweet. Any other questions on that queue stuff?
You also have methods to inspect the queue?
Yeah, we have. We don't have a lot of methods to like deeply introspect the queue in like an admin sense, like you would need like a separate console. We do have other methods on the job. This isn't totally related to your question, but it kind of reminded me. Like you can say like job release and then give it like a delay, something like that. And you can like get the IDs off the queue and stuff, but it's not super advanced. Like you couldn't build like an admin console with it. You would need something else, I think. Yeah, in the future I want to build or try to build some more stuff like that, kind of unified across all drivers, so it's really easy to like inspect and work with the queue, kind of like an admin level. That would be pretty cool. Yes. What you would do is you would say, let me double check. Yeah.
What was the question?
The question was, can you specify which queue you want to put a job on? So like say you want a mail queue, and maybe you're going to have like 3 workers on that queue, but then you need like I don't know, like some kind of Facebook profile updater queue that hits Facebook API, and you're only going to have like 1 worker. So what you would do is say your queue name. In your queue config, like you can configure different connections here. So like say you have like an email queue and you just give it like your server credentials for that queue or whatever. And then in your actual queue call, you can just say queue connection email push. And you can give it whatever here. So that connection thing, it's kind of like the database connection where you say DB connection, whatever, select. Same way with the queue, just queue connection, and then whatever the name is.
You've got different groups. Let's say you've got different types of emails. So transactional ones, newsletters and other things. Are there any groups inside?
I'm not sure I'm totally following. You have groups of emails.
Like different types of, let's say you've got transactional emails and newsletters, and
Yeah.
you want between different queues, both emails.
Yeah. So if you're going to use mail, if you're going to use the mail stuff, you can say mail queue on, and you might say like transaction emails here. The question was, how do you group these different kinds of emails? You can do that. There's also the later on. So you can say like a minute and then the group, the queue group. So yeah, you have a lot of control over which queues you put things in, and there's no limit to how many queue connections you have open. So you can pretty much do whatever you want there. I think queues is probably my favorite Laravel 4 feature.
Can you schedule something in the queue?
Yeah, like you could say, it's a little different than cron jobs, but you could say like queue later, and you could give like an hour or something, and then when your job actually runs, what you could do is say like at the end, just say job release for another hour. You know what I mean? And so it would kind of be like repeating, scheduled like that.
For example, my client wants to send an email tomorrow at 5.
Yeah. So you would just like calculate. You can't pass it a date time, but you would have to calculate the seconds, you know, and then pass it into later or whatever. The question was, how could we schedule an email for like tomorrow at a certain time? And you can't really pass like a date time. That would be cool though, to pass like a carbon object into it. Yeah, that'd be cool. You should open up a issue request for that, because that's a pretty cool idea. Yeah, but right now you have to manually kind of calculate out the difference in seconds. Anything else on queue?
How do you test queues?
So with testing queues, you have a couple options. The most testable way would be to push a class out onto the queue, because then you can new up the class totally separate from the queue and test it. So like, say you've got a queue handler class, and you're going to call whatever method. Now you can just test that queue handler class in total isolation from the queue, because it's just a regular class that the queue is calling, you know what I mean? So you new it up, inject any mocks you want, and you test your worker. Testing a queue closure is going to be harder, you know, because you don't really have a way to mock stuff and stuff like that. And then like in your route or in your test, you would also just like test that queue received a push call once with whatever queue handler and whatever data. You know, so that would be how you test like the actual call from your controller, and then you would test the handler totally separately. So that should give you tests on both, you know, your kind of routing layer and your queue layer. Does that make sense? The question was, how do you test the queue stuff? Same way with the commands. Like if you're abstracting your logic into these separate classes and just injecting them, just test those in total isolation from the CLI. So basically your CLI and your routes will become somewhat trivial and just be calling off into your kind of real app like logic, main business logic. All right, any more questions on that? Okay, so just one more thing. I hope this works, because Dale just hacked it up last night, but this is kind of some cool thing he was working on for 4.1 related to the console. Let me go to, where did I put this? Right here. He kind of is writing this PHP Artisan debug command, and how this is going to work is it opens up a local socket. Let me make this smaller so you can see like both at once. And I actually have an app ready that's going to make some SQL calls. So when I hit this Laravel app, it's going to call Artisan, and you can see it's dumping out the queries that are run like as I make requests. So you kind of get a live stream of what's happening in your application, like writing logs out, writing queries. So it's kind of cool. It's kind of like a alternative to having like a debug bar like in your face and messing with your CSS and Ajax all the time.
Debug bar, you've got to kind of wait for the request to end so you don't see it real time.
Yeah.
Because it has to render at the end.
So like one idea is we'll probably have like a monologue handler or something that's like intercepting your logs, writing them out to the console, and you kind of get this live stream for your app, like events, queries, logs. So that's going to be pretty slick new console feature.
So will that be tied in then with kind of Artisan serve, similar to like kind of like Mongo and Webrick?
Yeah, the way you get like the live view of your requests. Yeah, that'd be pretty sweet. Pretty cool. So that's one little 4.1 teaser we're working on.
Will that include the actual URL or route that's being called as well?
Yeah, like we want to also include the bindings. You can see like those aren't included. Yeah, but we just started kind of working on this pretty recently, so this was kind of the gist of it to get it working. But yeah, we want to include the binding stuff too. That would be helpful. And then yeah. So say you do something like that, like you only want to debug this request, kind of like Xdebug works. Yeah, so that should be pretty handy. I know I'll use that quite a bit. Okay, so that's gist of Artisan commands and some new stuff we're working on with Artisan. Any other questions about that or about Laravel in general, I guess?
Is it getting the name to Power Mouse?
No.
I was wondering, one thing that drew me to Laravel was the method naming and the elegance of the resulting code.
Yeah.
And I've always been a fan of writing 5-minute scripts and then argue for 30 minutes what's the best name for that function. I was wondering, what's your view on that? If you think that that's productive, and if you think that it helps Laravel to become so well adopted.
The question was if I think spending a lot of time naming stuff was productive for Laravel, right? Yeah, I think it was definitely productive for Laravel at the framework level. Like when I'm writing apps, I'm not as like totally obsessive about it because it's mainly just for us. But when thousands of people are using it, yeah, I try to be like super expressive with like the redirect to, input get, queue push. Yeah, I think about that a lot. Like queue later, I spent a lot of time on that, trying to think of how to think about queue delaying and all that stuff. So
That's the one you're proud of.
yeah, that was a proud one. Yeah, that was one I was pretty proud of. But yeah, I do spend a lot of time on the naming, and because I want it to be really intuitive, so where it's really memorable, and it's easy for new developers to come on and say, "Oh, queue push." It's pretty easy. Or this ask, like in the console, it's not like this get helper set dialog, all this funky stuff. So it's just super easy for new people. They come on your team, they read the code, and even if they never use Laravel, they have a general idea of what's going on. So.
When developing packages for Laravel, what sort of recommendation do you have for Artisan commands when you want to include those commands in a separate package?
So when I'm developing what now?
Like I have seen in service provider,
Yeah.
there are a few methods which could actually register the commands for that particular project or
Yes.
package. Like that, what's your recommendation in whether we should be doing it in the service provider, or you just showed that using the Artisan file
Yeah.
inside the main app, but to separate it, to put it inside the package.
Yeah.
What's your best?
I usually put it inside the package. The question, you can register your commands if you're building a package that's going to have Artisan commands, you can call this commands and pass it the IOC bindings for the command, and it will automatically register it for the developer. Isn't that how it works?
Yeah.
I kind of forget, but yeah, I always do it in the package just because it's easier for people who are using it. They can just pull it in and the commands are ready to go. They don't have to add anything to the Artisan file. To me, that's a lot easier.
Well, what are your favorite Artisan commands? By daily, when you work on a project, what sort of commands do you use?
Artisan Tinker has helped a lot. Sometimes if I'm just doing quick stuff in the database, I'll do that instead of like writing a route or going to like a database program. The queue stuff we use a lot. That's really cool. So yeah, those are probably my favorites.
Yeah, and another question I got with regard to service providers. Like the community is really good, but is there any recommended person to contact further, like to clarify about the service provider stuffs? Who is the person? I mean.
Yeah, Dale. Contact Dale. No, I don't know. We have some prominent community members that write packages, like Ben from Cardalus, and Ryan Tablata has written quite a few packages. He knows quite a bit about that. Yeah. Those are two, and you can always ask me if you just ping me in the channel. If I have time, I'll respond, but if I don't respond, it means I'm probably at work, but you can try again some other time, you know. So that'd be fun.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else?
I have a question about the queue.
Okay.
You mentioned that you can push a class to the queue.
Yeah.
But the Artisan command have to run the whole time to finish the queue.
Mm-hmm.
But is that just a lightweight command, or when it runs on the server, the Artisan command, is it heavy or lightweight?
Oh, it's pretty light. How he asked, is the command, the queue listen command that runs on the server, heavy or lightweight? And basically all it does is it just kind of continually spins up like a queue work command in a loop, and it will just check the queue, and if nothing's there, it will just like go away for a second, and then we'll check again. You can set like how often you want it to poll the queue. Like maybe you don't have a lot of jobs and you just want to poll like every 10 seconds or 20 seconds. You can set that, but no, it's not resource intensive itself for checking the queue. Now, whatever your queue handler does, that could be more resource intensive. So like sometimes people will have like a separate like VPS server just for their queue workers to kind of offload it off their web server. And then you can have more workers that way without affecting your front end server.
Just want to ask if you will make these code snippets available somewhere.
Yeah, I can push this up to GitHub or something.
That would be nice. And one other question, a coworker of mine, he's looking into different frameworks right now, also into Symfony. Mm-hmm. And he's unsure about about Eloquent. It is, I think it's a active record implementation, I guess, right?
Yeah.
And he was arguing that he's not sure if there's things he could not do with it, which he could do with Doctrine, for example. So I mean, I guess there's a discussion about things like that going on somewhere, but like, just maybe, is there a short answer to that for him?
Yeah.
Maybe.
I think there are things you can do with Doctrine that you can't do in Eloquent, and there are things you can do in Eloquent that you can't do in Doctrine, or that you can't do easily. And he doesn't. You don't have to look at Doctrine as Symfony specific, you know, of course, because you can use Doctrine, and people do use Doctrine with Laravel. With Active Record, with any Active Record ORM, the main concern people are going to have is like testing, which is why I tend to put a lot of my Active Record or Eloquent calls behind like a repository class, so that I can kind of abstract that in my controller and not like couple that into my Active Record stuff. So that's kind of the main thing I would be worried about, more than Doctrine versus Eloquent, because you can use Doctrine with Laravel. Like that shouldn't really affect the decision making that much.
Hi there. Another question about database. Maybe a noob question. I don't know. Is there any way to make Eloquent work with master-slave replication?
Yeah, I'm working on that.
Okay.
I'm working on that for the next release. Actually, there's been like a long-standing pull request for like automatic read-write different servers. You know, so yeah. It's not going to be that hard, I don't think. I think we're going to be able to do it.
I still have another question about Eloquent. There will be one day a way to have a multiple table inheritance.
Kind of like Doctrine has.
Yeah.
I don't have any plans for it right now. I don't know. I think it could be pretty complicated, I think. So not right now. Until there's like a lot of community demand for it, I guess. But Yeah, you'd probably have to use Doctrine for that. All right. Anything else? Good questions? Ben's got one, I think.
Mine was kind of simple. Seeing as though Matt and I don't know how to do it, how do you make your classes concat into one big file? Where do you edit that?
So what he's talking about is there's this PHP Artisan optimize command. It's going to be really slow on my VM. Let me go to my regular. But PHP Artisan optimize, what it does is Symfony has something like this, and it compiles like all the most used classes like into one file that we include instead of including like a lot of different classes. And a guy named Matthew Dowling wrote the library that does that. He works for Amazon on their PHP SDK. But you can actually add your own classes into that as well. And what you do is I think you make a config file and just put like your class name. Just a second, let me think about it. No, you don't need the class name. Just give it the path. Path to class, and then path to class 2. And then all you do is save that as compile.php in your config. I think that's all you have to do. It says there's already one. Do I have an empty one? Yeah, okay, yeah. Compile.php, just add your paths in there. There's a comment that talks about it. That will let you do all your classes too. Yeah, so that's kind of handy if you have like a lot of models or something that you're using a lot. Yeah, it would skip the auto loading. So it's a way to kind of get around that problem Fabian was talking about yesterday. It's the same way with Laravel. Like if you run like a profile on Laravel, most of the time is spent on auto loading, from disk. So this is a way to alleviate that into like combining it into one file. And it's stuff that's used on like every request, like the response object, the request object, the HTTP foundation stuff, all that's concatenated. Anything else? All right, so hopefully that was helpful. Basic intro to Artisan commands in Q, so enjoy the rest of the talks.